Hi guys. So I wanted to try to give you an explanation of the income and substitution effects, since this is kind of a tricky topic to work through. So I'll give this explanation within an example. So let's suppose that we have a consumer who is choosing to split their income between two goods, movie tickets and concert tickets. So let's draw that in a graph. So we'll put our concert tickets down here on the x-axis, and we'll put our movie tickets up here on the vertical axis. And the income and substitution effects are all about what happens when the price of one of the goods changes. So let's start out with an initial budget line, which might look something like this. And so here we have a consumer, and at the current prices, let's label this as budget constraint 1. And at the current prices, let's say that he's able to afford either a maximum of 12 movies or down here a maximum of 12 concert tickets. And when he faces this budget constraint, he chooses some optimal combination of concerts and movies using his indifference curves. And so let's say that that looks something like this. We'll label that as indifference curve 1, and we'll say that he's choosing this bundle here, point A, where he's consuming, let's say, 5 concert tickets. All right? Next, we want to see what happens when the price of concert tickets changes. So we're going to let the price of concert tickets decrease, and so that'll rotate his budget constraint out along this axis here, indicating that he can still consume at most the same amount of movies, 12, but now he'll be able to consume more concert tickets. So our new budget line is going to look something like this. And we'll label this one as BC2. And after that price change, our consumer chooses a new optimal bundle facing this new budget line, and he uses his set of indifference curves again to do that, and we'll say that he chooses this point here. Okay, we'll label that point as point B. He's now on indifference curve 2, and we'll come down and we'll say that he's now consuming 10 concert tickets when he faces this new budget constraint BC2. Okay? So the total effect of that price change is that after the price of concerts decreased, our consumer went from consuming 5 concerts to 10 concerts. So the total effect is 5. He consumes 5 additional concerts. And to be a little bit more specific about it, let's even say that this new intercept down here is at 24. Right, so now at most he could consume twice as many concert tickets as he was previously. So the total effect of that price decrease is that our consumer chooses to consume 5 additional concerts. And we want to ask now, why does he do that? And it turns out that there's 2 reasons. Those 2 reasons. So the first is that after the price change, concerts are now cheaper relative to movies than they were before. Right? They used to cost the same amount. He could afford the same amount of concerts and movie tickets. And now concerts cost half as much as movies. So other things equal, anytime the price of one of your goods decreases, it gets cut in half, you should consume more of that good, right? And that's what we call the substitution effect. So just due to that decrease in price, our consumer is going to consume more concerts than he was before. And the sign of that substitution effect is always negative. It always goes in the opposite direction of the price change. So since that price went down, the the substitution effect is telling our consumer concerts are cheaper than they were before, consume more of them. If the price of concerts had gone up instead, the substitution effect would tell our consumer consume less concerts. So that's the first reason. So our total effect is the sum of the two different reasons. The first is the substitution effect. The second reason that our consumer now consumes more concerts than he was before is that in real terms, he's now richer than he was before, right? Previously, he could only consume bundles that were below this black BC1, right? Anything in this triangle down here was affordable. Now he can consume anything that's below BC2, which includes everything that he could consume before, plus all this additional stuff in here. So he's unambiguously richer than he was before. He can afford, at say, instead of consuming bundle A, he could consume the exact same number of concerts and more movies, right? So any way you slice it, he's better off than he was before because it's as if his income has gone up. And that's the second reason for our price change, which is the income effect. I misspoke there. It's not the second reason for the price change. It's the second reason for the total effect, the result of the price change. Okay? So the total effect is due to these two separate components, and what we want to do is we want to figure out exactly how much of that total effect, which we know to be 5, how much of it is due to the substitution effect and how much of it is due to the income effect. So first, let's try to figure out how much is due to the substitution effect. So in order to figure out what that is, what we need to do is we need to see what would happen if our consumer faced these new prices, where concerts cost half as much as movies, but he wasn't allowed to feel richer the way he is here. So what we need to do is we need this slope, which represents that price change, but we need to pull it back in, right? We don't want him to get that income change. So what we'll do specifically is we'll take BC2, our new budget constraint, and we'll create a new hypothetical budget constraint where we pull that inward, we decrease his income, all the way back until he's limited back to his old indifference curve, right? So we're saying, you're going to face the new prices, but you're not going to feel any happier than you were before. You're not going to get that income effect. So we try and pull this blue line down here in parallel, and we find where it just touches indifference curve 1. And we'll label that as BC3. So then we're asking, if our consumer were to face BC3, he never will, of course, because it's hypothetical, but if he did, what bundle would he choose? And he again just chooses where his indifference curve lies tangent to that budget constraint, which is right here. We'll label that as point C. And it looks like that corresponds to about 6 concert tickets. Okay? So if instead of going all the way from budget constraint 1 to budget constraint 2, which is what happens in reality, if our consumer just went from his original budget constraint to just facing the new prices without the income boost, what would he choose? He would choose to consume 6 concert tickets. And that's our substitution effect. He goes from 5 to 6. So our substitution effect is 1. And we know that the total effect is just the sum of the substitution effect and the income effect. So the income effect has to be 4. And the way to see that is, so far, all we've done is change the prices, right? We've changed the price ratio without allowing our consumer to feel richer. So we went from budget constraint 1 to budget constraint 3. Now we want to see what happens due to the income effect. So let's now leave those prices where they're at, and let's just make him feel richer. So let's just push that green line out until we eventually get to the real budget constraint that he faces, right? And any change that is in there is just due to him getting richer, just due to the income effect. So as that green line pushes out, eventually it'll hit this blue line, and we know what happens there. He chooses B or 10. And so that income effect is that difference between 6 and 10, and so the income effect is 4, which is what we put here. Okay? So, to sort of summarize what we've said here, the first thing that we want to find is the total effect, and that's just what happens in reality. That's what's the difference between what our consumer first chose and what our consumer chose when he faced the new budget constraint after the price change. So that's 5 to 10. Then we ask how much of that was due to the substitution effect. To answer that, we just force our consumer to face those new prices while being stuck back at his original indifference curve, and we find that he would increase his consumption of concert tickets by just 1. And then we allow him to face those same prices, we'll leave those fixed, and then we'll just make him feel richer by pushing that hypothetical budget constraint out until we hit the real one. And the difference between those two budget constraints is 4, and that's our income effect.